So welcome, Josh.
Thank you.
So I'm going to just switch over now to look at your chart.
Okay.
Are you seeing that now?
I can see that, yes.
Great. So I just want to double check our data. So you were born the 7th of July, 1995 at 2:18 in the afternoon in Greenwich.
Yes.
So you're right near the, the UT station where the universal time is stationed.
Yes. I was born there, yes.
Interesting. All right, I'm just trying to move the video so it's in a better place for me to see everything. Right, I'd like to just give a little rundown of the natal chart, and we can then see the foundation of what's going on sort of in the life story, and then when we look at the transits, we understand that better.
Mhm.
And so in your case, we see, of course, the ascendant is in Libra, and the ruler of the ascendant is very nicely placed in the 10th house and in a sign that she loves to be in, which is Cancer. There's a lot in your chart, obviously, that is about relationship. That's obviously a signature of Libra, but also, of course, justice. And this in your chart stands out in terms of, I think, personal justice in some ways. There's a lot of some challenge growing up, it seems. I think your parents were probably very loving and good people. But there also seems to be issues that may be related to either alcohol or drug abuse or some kind of other challenge at home that made home feel a little bit less than safe for you. Or there was some kind of, was it unsettling maybe growing up? There was a lot of moving around, maybe? Is that possible?
Yes, I moved around a lot when I was younger. And my home life wasn't very happy, I'd say. Yeah, it was very traumatic in some ways.
Yeah.
Mm.
You have the moon in Scorpio conjunct the North Node. So the moon in Scorpio can show a real friction with the mother. There can be an intensity of relationship that is almost like a bonding, and yet at the same time, it's almost like you can't shake free of it, for good or bad. You're stuck with it, for good or bad. And again, it's not because your parents aren't good people or that they didn't love you, but that there was more of another issue. And I think even in their own relationship, which I think was a pretty good one in terms of their initial meeting, at the very least around the time you were born. You've got a lovely trine between sun and moon. Sun can represent the father, moon is the mother. And when we see that trine, usually the parents were getting along pretty well at the time of the conception or birth. And that also shows that there's a certain amount of balance in the personality as well, that there's a kind of a flow and an ease in the personality. And this can actually, in a way, I mean, obviously it's a structure for you, it gives you something to anchor yourself to, but at the same time, that ease, what becomes a kind of an ease, can also be where you let others take advantage of you, where you kind of are you're too nice at times, and at other times you get so enraged, like this real anger here too, but which also the Mars in the 12th, for example, which is ruling that moon, which is why the moon is kind of itchy in Scorpio. It's a difficult combo. But that Mars in the 12th is right next to Chiron. And so we see that there's some kind of issue around anger. It's in opposition to Saturn. So there's issues around authority. Maybe you were raised in a very strict environment. There was no tolerance for certain behaviors, but also no talking back. Like there's just no way. So Chiron and Mars makes it difficult to even just express anger, possibly also because you're afraid of when that valve bursts, what's going to happen, but also there was almost like a menace. There was like, no, don't you dare kind of thing. And so this is kind of a self-restriction, if you like, or self-censorship that can happen where you're walking on eggshells. And it's difficult to shake that off, because this is where you're growing up with this kind of feeling of, I can't take up too much space. I can't really be myself, because that could be dangerous. And so this is something to keep in mind. And while you're, reflecting on things that might be going on now, because as you're coming through what we'll see the transits, you're going to be, in many ways, these situations are kind of called in for review, like not necessarily the actual events, but just the energy behind them and your childhood and what might be feeling like it's holding you back. Certainly you're here to experience your own values and your own sense of pleasure and your own capacity to be kind of standing on your own 2 feet in some way, but it'll be different to what you were raised with, without a doubt. Your South Node is in the 8th house, which is other people's values. That also, another way of seeing that, there's a couple of different things in your chart that shows that, for example, Neptune is squaring your ascendant, descendant axis, and that's kind of a similar vibe, a little different because it also comes with a sense of maybe submissiveness or not really seeing yourself clearly, but it's also much like the South Node in the 8th, giving up a lot more of your power to other people, including your own sense of self-worth. So if other people say you're okay, then you feel okay, but you kind of grew up doubting that. Now you have just these beautiful, this sun in the 10th house, which is a wonderful placement for success. And Venus is there too, which is again another recognizable career success, somehow with the quality of helping or nurturance or maybe feeding others. You might like cooking. You're probably a really good cook. Usually people with good placements in Cancer are good at cooking, nurturing and nourishing others. And then this comes back to that ascendant in Libra, which is like maybe a little too much caring for others. And that can pose personal problems where you feel like you're kind of left out of the equation. And we see with Eris there in square to the sun, and with Lilith conjunct the sun. Lilith conjunct the sun can make you extremely magnetic and very charming, and extremely deep in terms of how you present. But in terms of how you experience that Lilith, it can make you angry because that's your identity as well. Your sun is you, right? That's how you are, how you see your role in life. And Lilith on the sun, I like to say wherever Lilith is, it's kind of like where we're pissed off at things. And what is the 10th house? It's also authority figures. And the sun represents the father as well. And so there's this kind of quality of like unfairness about this whole situation, which feels like maybe you were like the black sheep of the family. You were the one you were the easy target in some way. Does that sound about right?
It does, yes. Yeah.
And would your family, maybe you grew up with other people in the family, like your parents broke up and reconfigured a family, or you were living with grandparents, or you were living with somebody's, I don't know, mother or something like that? Yeah.
Yeah.
All of the above.
All those, yeah. Yeah. When I was younger, I lived with my grandma for a year or two.
Yeah.
And then my parents split up when I was 2. Then they remarried when I was 8 or 9.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah.
Right. So this is interesting for you because this is something that happened to your parents' relationship. And it can be something that you experience in your relationships. And that is that there's this some kind of outside interference in the couple, in the relationship, meaning that perhaps one or the other of the parents was meddling in your parents, the grandparents, for example, was meddling, or keeping one of your parents dependent on them and insinuating themselves into the relationship. And
Yeah.
that doesn't work so well for a couple, because I think your parents were actually pretty good. Your parents made up a nice couple, but there was something that came between them,
Yes.
and that is it's infuriating, right?
Mm.
It's pretty
Hmm.
awful.
Yeah.
And so we see the grandmother here. This is when we see Neptune in the fourth house, um, sometimes Neptune in the 12th. We can see that there's a strong connection to the grandmother, but at the same time, that's not necessarily comfortable. That's in a trine to Mars and a trine to Chiron, which means that it's not really comfortable. And yet she had a huge influence on you. This is a direct square to your ascendant descendant axis. So that could be something really interesting to explore in terms of how you saw yourself through her eyes, for example, or how you grew up under her influence. And was that accurate? Was that uh, can you separate out what is true from what was her projections?
Mm.
And that can help you, because in your relationships too, there may also be this element of there's always some kind of interference that doesn't allow me to just be in my relationships. And so, and that can come from also this really intense relationship with your own mother. And so just as a warning, being careful that you're not repeating the same pattern unconsciously
Mhm.
that can then harm what your own desire is, which is to express your own love in your own relationships in your own terms. With the Saturn in the sixth house, you also put yourself under quite a lot of pressure. So we already see that with Mars in Virgo. You're really hard on yourself. I think that's a model of what you got as a child. So you're pretty hard on yourself. You're critical with yourself. Maybe you find it difficult to just kind of relax because you're worried about how things are, or is everything going to be okay, checking all the double checking, triple checking. And then that Saturn in the sixth house has you working hard. Like it's not easy to just kind of relax and enjoy your life. And in many ways, that moon in the second house and north node in the second house are an invitation to come towards a sensuality of life, an enjoyment of without obsession, because the north node on the moon can also pull in some obsessive qualities if we're not conscious of our motives, let's say. It doesn't have to be that way. But that sensuality, the joy, the just sheer delight in sensual pleasure, in living through your own values and so on. This is all very much what you're here to experience. And that, of course, that's money too. Pluto's in your second house. Money, it can be at times that you, again, measure yourself according to what you own, what you have. In the beginning, in early life, that tends to be more of an issue. As you get older, then it's kind of like, why was that important? And then you kind of get to the point where it's like, no, now I know what I need to change. And so that Pluto in the second house will have you changing your values throughout life. Each time there's a big influence of Pluto, then you're questioning your values, you're reassessing your choices and what it is that you need. This is also a security house in terms of money, in terms of income and so on. So that's something that might fluctuate and change as you go through life, but you have a really strong capacity for success and career success. All right. Do you have any questions before we move into some transits? or anything you'd like to add?
No, I mean, you've been pretty good so far. Yeah, I mean, that all makes sense. That's all. Um, yes, yes. Well, thank you. Yes.
Okay, okay. And the one thing I didn't cover, and I just want to mention it now, is that your midheaven, because we're using the whole sign system, the ascendant is within the first house and the midheaven floats around. So it doesn't just begin the 10th house. The 10th house always remains the same meaning, but the midheaven will move around. And in your case, it's in the 11th house in Leo, which means that your capacity in terms of how you want to show up in the world is actually as an influence, and dare I say that word, influencer, as somebody who can lead, as somebody who can be seen. And you do want that, indeed, a kind of a recognition. It's not fame. It might be fame. It's not that necessarily that you're looking for, but it's more you just want to be recognized for who you are and what you do, what you can contribute, and that's actually it's available to you. It's there. It's something that you're here for. So you mustn't even also think, oh, that's immodest, or that's not okay that because it's actually very strongly what you're here for. The nodal axis is really powerfully squaring your midheaven and IC. And so we see that one of your evolutionary goals, aside from your emotional sort of security and your sense of your own emotional values and your way of living your life through your own preferences, and values, including material ones, but that is dependent on, or let's say the success of that is you expressing yourself out in the world. And Leo is fully about self-expression. It's really that thing about showing up in your own way in society, in some way, in service of a bigger dimension. And that's probably going to where that Saturn is going to help you the most. In the 6th house is where you have the capacity to work hard. With Venus in the 10th house, you work really well with the public. Moon in the 2nd house, you work really well with the public. I think that comes naturally to you. And that's something that is also there with the moon squaring the midheaven. You're very charming with people, and people like you. They resonate with you. The only challenge, again, which was similar to what I mentioned here with the Saturn and the South Node and so on, is that you mustn't, don't look for praise or don't value yourself through what other people think of you. Just let them like you, but don't make that mean anything. You know what I mean? So you're not because that's one of the traps there too with an ascendant in Libra, is that you're so hyper focused on keeping everybody else happy that you lose yourself in the equation. I just noticed also that Mercury is in a really lovely trine from the 9th house, higher education, Jupiter in the 3rd, lots of really good mind, actually, really solid mind with the capacity to balance both the big picture and the details. And that Mercury is in a trine to the ascendant. So this could also represent teaching, for example. If it's not teaching directly, it can be like the kind of teaching, like mentoring, and this kind of thing is also very good. Right, and so of course that midheaven is ruled by the sun in the 10th house, so very strong, meaning that the success is about what you do in terms of you're not supposed to be shedding that compassionate, helpful nature. It's more a question of, to whom you offer it. Are you, you're not giving away the jewels, as it were, casting your pearls before swine, or whatever that expression is. So, okay, let's have a look at your transits. So this is just now, this is today. One of the things let's start with the eclipses, because in fact, I'm going to back up and we'll go right to the eclipses in order, because I think they really did affect you quite personally. Let's go with the 20th of April eclipse. Because if these things are still active, it takes a few months for them to show their effects. So this is 20th of April, and we have the new moon eclipse, and that's in your house of relationship. at the same time as this eclipse. Now, this is Eris. I don't always use Eris, but when it shows up in the chart in a particular way that resonates with what's going on with the person, I add it in. And in your case, natally, Eris is at 18. It's a broad conjunction to the descendant opposition to the ascendant. So that shows that there can be some real frustration in relationships, a desire for more integrity, more honesty. And now we have Eris conjunct your descendant. And the eclipse with the North Node and the new moon in North Node in Taurus and the new moon in Aries, that is your South Node was the midpoint of that eclipse.
Mm.
And so that's quite significant because it's like it's kind of embracing this energy of the South Node. It's kind of paradoxical when the North Node goes over the South Node. It's kind of like saying review now those automatic patterns, review the patterns that may have come from childhood, things that may have come from influences that were like unconscious patterns, especially in the 8th house, unconscious family patterns and influences that can be not only your family that you know, but also potentially from ancestral patterns. Now, this is where the 12th house energy and the 4th house energy come in as well. This is a strong connection to ancestral experience, but certainly family. So 4th house I think of as people in the family lineage that we know or that we could have known, like grandmothers and things like that. And then the ancestral lineage is people we don't necessarily know. They may have been generations before, or it was like, you know, who knows, but there's some connection to that. These are people that they were not necessarily people in our actual life this time around. And so there's this kind of paradox here with the North Node on the South Node that suggests that it's time to review as you're coming to your reverse nodal return. It's coming up in a month or so. And it's time to review what is this automatic kind of programming? What is this experience? And is there a new way now with the North Node in the 8th house, which has been there since the sort of middle of January 2022? Is there a new way now of seeing your value through other people's eyes? Is there a new way of sharing resources with people? Now that can come through even in terms of business partnerships, for example, that can be income or the benefits of working with people like clients, if you have that kind of work. And if it's in terms of partnership, in life partnership, intimate partnership, that North Node going through the 8th house is also a new way of being intimate, you know, with more of a sense of what is now necessary, what is now relevant to you, in an equal footing, because now we're looking at that South Node in the 2nd house, which is kind of like saying it's less materialistic, more spiritual. So it's kind of it's a paradox here because we've got your chart is flipped compared to the natural zodiac, right? The natural houses. So you always have this kind of paradoxical thing going on. Like we've got Jupiter and Mercury in their opposite houses, but they're in their own signs. And so they're bringing the same energy, but it's kind of, which is really great, actually. It's a beautiful thing for a Libra rising because it balances everything out in a nice way. So you have this capacity now for the South Node going through the 2nd house to evaluate your material needs and money and so on, and focus more on what others can bring to you. And this is, I think, another message you're going to get on the 5th of May eclipse. Let's have a look at that one, where it's a lot more about what can I also receive? What can others bring to me? Why should I always be carrying water for others? What can I now allow myself to receive? So that Eris is on the descendant, so there might be some frustration in a relationship, or in general, perhaps in relationships. And at the same time, Chiron is coming up to conjoin Eris in your chart. And so that's a real healing around your self-image, around yourself, with regards to issues around your integrity. Eris is about discord and any kind of energy that felt like it was out of alignment or out of was unjust, inappropriate, for example, around relationships. ruled by Mars in the 12th. So again, there can be moments in your life where you really have experienced some kind of bad treatment, like actual even abuse at the hands of others. And this could be a really intense time for you to make peace with the event, not necessarily condoning, but really offering up an opportunity for you to shed this, letting go in the second house, letting go of this energy here of intensity, emotional intensity, potentially psychological intensity as well. Eris is squaring your natal Neptune, and so this can be a beautifully intense healing opportunity. So there might be quite an emotional roller coaster for you in the months ahead, but which will be kind of a cleansing, like a kind of a shedding of an extreme period, let's say, of your life, but also a shedding of what came before, of what was the early life experience. And now we have Neptune on Saturn. That's already been 2 years, pretty much, a year and a half or 2 years that Neptune has been there. Prior to that, Neptune, say 3-4 years ago, was opposing your Chiron and Mars. And that this may have felt like a period of time where it's like, I don't know what to do. I don't know which direction I'm supposed to go in. I don't know what I'm even here for. And this becomes now, with this passage, now Neptune's going to back up and go back over Saturn, and that will all be done by February, March of next year, the latest March next year. But this is a clarifying moment in terms of your spiritual direction, or your sense of, in the sixth house, in terms of your sense of purpose, perhaps. That also, with Neptune going through the sixth house, may have brought up some emotional or psychological challenges, like you might have had depression or problems around just feeling emotionally grounded or stable over the last decade or so, where things at moments may have been challenging in terms of the everyday experience. And now that actually is quite stabilizing, having that Saturn there and Saturn in that sixth house at the same time. So this becomes an opportunity as you come to your Saturn return, which is not going to be until the end of 2024.
Yeah.
And then you'll have it, more or less. It's usually about 9 months, so it's kind of a zigzaggy thing, but you're not going to get that in this year. But that Saturn return, of course, comes with the Saturn opposition to Mars and Chiron. And so you might find that you go through a phase where you're really feeling intense doubt, or you might feel down on yourself. Saturn is currently trining your moon, which can, and that will come back later in the year, because Saturn is going to go up to 7 degrees and come back all the way to 0. So it's trining your moon in North Node and sextiling your South Node 3 times, essentially, this year. And it's stationing at 7. So it's going to be stationing in a trine to your moon. Now, so that can be a relatively long period. Let's say it'll be June. It's not too far away, and you're already kind of in orb already. And so you might feel a little bit isolated. You might feel like, I don't really connect with people, even if people are around, like they can be sitting right next to you, but you don't feel as usually the way you might connect with somebody. Or it might be actually that you're feeling separate, that other people that you'd like to be around are not there for you, or that they're in another place physically, or that you're no longer in a relationship, and then that makes you feel a little cut off. And that's the same with this is actually creating a trine. It will again create a trine with Venus. So I think it's more this relationship question. Are you currently in a relationship, or is that something that's in a work in progress?
A work in progress.
Yes, because that seems to be the kind of focal point in 2023. It's there's a lot of potential for that.
Okay.
And the Jupiter is it's in a square in the midpoint between the Uranus and Neptune in the fourth house. So again, with regards to relationships, come back to the earlier life experience of where you may not have been seeing clearly what you needed to feel secure and stable, psychologically, emotionally, physically, in your actual home. Like, where do I live? What space do I live in? With whom? All those kinds of questions, they will be solicited, I think. And you've already had the passage of, I'm going to just come to the current transit so we can zigzag a bit. So you've already had the passage of Pluto over that point, and then in 2021, 2022, no, 2020 and 2021, and to a certain extent last year, you had Pluto going over that Neptune. And then especially now, the last year, you've had Pluto conjunct Uranus. Now that's a big deal. That's a really big life change. Pluto at the same time conjuncting Uranus as it is sextiling Pluto. And so this is a really big opportunity for a complete sort of rewrite, flipping the script. It's so this is coming up on a number of really important life-changing transits that will allow you to kind of reset the clock, as it were, in a way that I think you can find much more empowering. Now, the empowerment comes through living through your own values. This is where that North Node is calling in the South Node is calling in this new way of seeing yourself emotionally, letting go of this, whatever that became, that this potential for obsessing around either psychological or emotional attachments or desires. It can also be the second house of like too much obsession, maybe around money or around, certain material comforts, or what you needed in the material world, for example. And so this is an opportunity for you to completely flip that. And then when the nodes then change, oh, by the way, yeah, you're going to have the conjunction of Jupiter with the North Node on your 2-degree South Node and in opposition to your North Node. So this is another really big deal. So we're talking about really significant, rare transits that are readapting the main message of the chart, which is to keep orienting yourself towards your own yourself as a resource, yourself as a what's the word? You're your own best gauge of your value, and you are your own best friend in many ways. And that it doesn't preclude having a relationship. It's not about that. It's about having better relationships in a way that integrates what happened to you in your childhood. You may have ended up playing a substitute role in terms of your parents' relationship, that when your father left, you may have unconsciously become the substitute man of the house, the man about the house. Was that you?
That was me even today.
Yeah. So that's not cool. Like, I totally get that would be a response to a traumatizing situation, but you will have to, this transit is going to poke at that. And you will have to make peace with disappointing somebody at some point that is not you. For a change. So whether you're not disappointing yourself anymore, but it's going to mean you're going to disappoint somebody else. And this is going to be done, the best would be that this be done with the help of a third party neutral resource that could be in terms of therapy. I really love to recommend family constellations work when there's a lot of things going on with parents, or there's like real family stickiness in a chart. family constellations brings up a really beautiful understanding of the unconscious energetic patterns that we have with the most important people in our lives. And the great thing is you do it on your own. You don't have to bring your family along. No, you don't have to, you just do it. And what happens is something shifts, and it shifts in you, and that allows something new to come into the relationship, existing ones as well as having much better new ones. See? So this Pluto going over the IC of course represents your early childhood experience in opposition to the MC. That's at the end of May. Basically the last week of May, you're going to have Pluto opposing Mars. So Mars crossing over the midheaven, squaring your nodes, and Pluto there at the base of your sort of the memory of your childhood at the Imam Chelai.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, it's still in orb of your Uranus. So it's this whole thing about God. We need to do this differently. This can't. This is a tectonic shift. It's not like, oh, I'll just tweak this little thing here and so on. It's really about digging deep. It's Pluto at the bottom of your chart, which is already a big thing. You've already had 15 years of that. So already hats off. You had 15 years of Pluto going through the fourth house in opposition to Venus and the Sun. That would have been a big deal, no doubt.
Yeah, it was, yeah, huge.
Did you change careers at that time? Sort of around what would that be, like 10 years ago?
Oh, 10 years ago, I was in school still.
So that might have been graduation then.
10 years ago, yeah, around then, yeah.
Right. So yeah. So this you get the picture, right? This is going to be like a 2.0 version, Josh 2.0. And the most important message I want to be sure you're hearing is that it can be really challenging. This can be really challenging, and you're up for it. You've got a moon in Scorpio, you've got Pluto in Scorpio, you've got a North Node in Scorpio, you're up for it. Never doubt yourself. But at the same time, don't tolerate misery either. Don't tolerate, make sure that you surround yourself with people who will be there for you and support you. Mars in the 12th house, conjunct Chiron. Again, like I said, you're dealing with stuff that is bigger than just you. You're dealing with patterns that are big, systemic patterns. And so that requires a kind of a team to help you parse that out, so you can figure out what is yours and what is not yours, and then hand back what's not yours. And this also with the Mercury here, squaring Mars and Chiron, there may have been some issues with siblings, some real challenges with siblings, or just like arguments at home as well. Was it loud at home?
Yeah, when I was young, I didn't get on well with my my siblings. Well, I'm the oldest of six, so I come from a big family. The oldest daughter, she didn't get on well with me when I was younger, when we were younger. So, but now it's better, but she's a bit distant. That's all.
Okay, so you feel now your relationships with your siblings are good. They're constructive, yeah, because you do have Jupiter in a really nice dignity in your third house. It is retrograde. That just means that usually it takes a little more effort for the results, but you'll get the results. And that usually indicates that there's some good blessings in relationships with siblings, although it certainly looks like growing up there was some tension there. Yeah. All right. Do you have any questions for me in terms of what's coming up? I didn't actually look at the autumn eclipses, and I want to do that because you've got an ascendant in Libra. So think about your questions and jump in if you have any. Yes, look at that. Here's the October eclipses.
Yeah, I saw that too.
You saw that already? Well, there you go. Yeah, Eris is still hanging around. Eris is now on the North Node at that time. So this is really, you might want to dig in a little bit to that understanding of Eris, about this disruption, about resentment or disappointment, or a feeling of betrayal, or a feeling of inauthenticity, this kind of thing, where that may have come across in relationships or others that you may have related to
Yeah, yeah.
in some way, and to try and understand that, because it can also turn around and become a real point of empowerment.
Hmm.
And so yeah, wow, so you see, as if Pluto weren't enough, you got a south node eclipse on your ascendant. And so you're really here to be, I mean, it's really that 2.0. um, Mars on the North Node. This can be very empowering energy, but it can also be very, of course, explosive, temperamental, emotional. Um, with that Mercury way up there in the ninth house and that Jupiter in the third, I do hope you write. I do hope you take notes and do journals and do all the right things that a good Mercury in the sign of Gemini and the Jupiter in the sign of Sagittarius in the third house would do. This
Yes.
will this will help a lot. And writing in that big picture way, which is that North Node in the second house, around values, around what is real and what is not real. And here's another thing around fear. This is more the spring eclipses, I think. Uh,
Hmm.
what am I becoming aware of in terms of what I'm afraid of, and what needs to change there as well. Um, yeah, good. It seems like you're quite well equipped already to go for these big changes. The main thing is that the nice part is that with the Pluto in sextile, it's a change you want. It's like, I'm so ready for this. This has to change. The conjunction is a little bit wobbly in the sense that we really just don't know what's coming. That's the thing with the Pluto on Uranus. It's going to be a while, like maybe a year and a half or so, before you really kind of know what happened. It's like this, there will be a lot of change. And so, in many ways, just roll with it. Don't think that you're doing anything wrong. It's just more that the change is going to be quite ongoing, really, for another couple of years.
Okay. Okay.
And so here we have now the eclipse of the 28th. This is we're done with the. You'll be happy to know we're done with the Scorpio eclipses. Now we're up to, so we've had the first of the Libra and Aries version, and now we're having the last of the Taurus eclipses over the past couple of years, and this we don't get in anymore for the next 9 years. And so that's very significant for you personally. It's going to be at the midpoint in opposition to your moon North Node conjunction, and of course it's within the conjunction of your South Node. So this is real new. This is recognizing this eighth house stuff, which is perhaps issues around unconscious emotional or psychological patterns, unconscious ways that you gave up your power, that South Node in the eighth house, unconscious ways that you allowed yourself to be okay through other people's eyes without seeing yourself. Keep in mind that that's going to be square your midheaven. So this is all about, where do I go with this? Where can I, you're going to be somehow required in a way to show up differently in the world. If we think of the midheaven not just as a job, but how you're coming out into the world and showing yourself to the world. And so I see that again, it's quite constructive. That's going to be, you're going to feel that already probably at the end of September, and right through for sure to the end of the year, if not into the spring next eclipse cycle, because it's so personal to you.
Yeah.
And by that time, Pluto will, by the end of the year, Pluto will be, I can't remember, sometime in December, I've forgotten the date. Pluto will be back into your fifth house. And then it only just kind of nudges back and kind of is like a little recall towards Uranus, but the biggest of those changes will have been done by the end of 2023 in terms of the Pluto-Uranus conjunction. So you're in for quite a year. I think quite an exciting one. This is where the new potentials for relationships can come in. You know, North Node going through the seventh, you shedding a way of being, and the focus now being on other relationships, on the way you would like them to show up, and also with the North Node, it often is very new. You may have had a glimpse of that with Jupiter going through there. You know, ironically, I always find that Jupiter going through the seventh house, unless there are really great aspects that pull in other relationship aspects into the seventh house, it doesn't really bring a whole lot of interest or benefit in terms of finding a great partner. Actually, Jupiter going through the eighth or through the ninth house, or even the 10th house, of course, is more likely to bring in interesting partnerships, because then you're starting to get into you've kind of done the work of the seventh house, trying to understand the bigness or the things that you need to deal with in relationships, and then by the time you get to the eighth house, you kind of get the benefit of relationships. And especially if you're partnered up, that also tends to be very helpful for partners as well. It feels like the partners in a cycle of success or positivity or expansion of some kind. So, any questions, or is there anything you want to ask that I haven't covered?
Um, what sorts of job would work for me?
So you have, like I mentioned earlier, you have this very nurturing quality with Cancer.
Yeah, yeah.
And so that's a way of being. So there are many, many ways that you can express that. It can be things like healthcare, or because you also, when we look at this axis, the sixth and the 12th house axis, it's the Pisces and Virgo axis. So part of you, in terms of the way that you relate to people, desires to be helpful. You want to be of service and helpful to people. That Saturn in the sixth house also wants to be helpful. And it is in the health axis, which represents also, it's emphasized a little bit by that quality of the nurturance and the care that you have for other people. And that can also represent food. So you got your moon in the second house. You have the Sun and Venus in the 10th house in Cancer, and then you have Saturn and Pisces in the sixth house. So food related work of all kinds is also there. Skills come into the third house, and you've got apparently a very good capacity for skills and learning skills. So I mentioned earlier as well that teaching can be quite good. It can be mentoring, not necessarily strictly speaking teaching, but teaching can also be very good in terms of what you're naturally good at and what you would be motivated to do. That could be teaching at a level of like children in school, for example, early education, or it can be young people like teenagers, for example. And then that brings in this beautiful quality of taking care, sort of mother hen energy that's here. And I don't want to make this seem like like Cancer is very nurturing and caring about people, but it doesn't also mean that you can't be a really strong business person. You've got Jupiter in the third, which is the house of commerce. It's a very good house for business. You've got a keen sense of money, North Node and the Moon and Pluto all in the second house. So you're sharply aware of money, and the precision, the potentially over fussy, precise Mars there in Virgo, which is ruling that. So there are, and that would be international, by the way. So that also is another factor that, for example, Mercury in the ninth or Mars in the 12th can show that you might also want to move away. Certainly you'd like to move away from your childhood place,
Yes.
if not far away.
Far, far away.
Yeah. So there you go. So that all of that can be part of the work as well. So Mercury in the ninth is also higher, can be higher education, but it can also just be about business abroad, doing business abroad. Now they're tying into each other, so you've got the Mercury squaring that Mars. So that's the thing. In childhood, that's not comfortable. But over time, you realize, oh wow, I'm sharp. My tongue is sharp. I am conscious as an adult of how to use that. But I think like super fast. Like this is a person who thinks on their feet, really, really sharp mind. So sales, for example. As I mentioned earlier, your midheaven is in Leo. And so what you do, you uniquely do. You want to show up yourself with that, and that can also represent working for yourself. And that again, with the Jupiter in the third house, that would be possible because that gives you the capacity to thrive in business. And just the Venus I mentioned earlier about being good with the public. Venus trining the moon here in the second, Venus and the sun in the 10th house. It's quite, we're going to ignore that Lilith up there. That's more for you. And Venus and the sun in the 10th is quite good for career success. So yeah, and Jupiter rules your sixth as well. It's ruling that Saturn. So that pulls that in. So your everyday efforts, Saturn, the everyday structure and workhorse kind of energy that you've created for yourself with this Saturn-Mars opposition, at the very least, you should invest it in yourself. Invest it in your own business. That Jupiter is trining your midheaven. You could really do some really great things for on your own terms. That would be a beautiful representation of that North Node in the second house. On my terms.
On my terms, yeah.
What do you want to do? Have you an idea?
I've done quite a few things in my life so far. I was a food blogger for a year.
Well, there you go, writing about food.
Well, and I loved it. But now I'm an artist. I paint. And I run a travel magazine through Instagram. So traveling.
Absolutely wonderful. Yeah, look at that. So here's a better version now of the Neptune squaring the ascendant, because your ascendant is ruled by beautiful Venus, arts, beauty, and so on. And when Neptune is squaring the ascendant, of course, it can be not seeing clearly, or being disappointed in early childhood, or having some challenges in early childhood, but it's deeply creative. And Mars in the 12th is also very, very creative energy. So that can actually be something very, very healing for you. So yeah, brilliant. Carry on. And that Mars is, of course, foreign lands, and then so is that Mercury. So you're tying that in to your travel writing.
Lovely. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the Lot of Fortune, the Pot of Fortune.
Yes, yeah. Where is that? I didn't check that.
It's in my 5th house.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'm just wondering what could happen.
Yes. So with the Pot of Fortune in the 5th house, then that can also be something very tied to children, and joy and success by having children and through your children. I happen to have that myself.
Okay.
And also through entrepreneurship. So 5th house is a house of entrepreneurs. It's a house of your creative expression. And of course, that can be very artistic. That's an Aquarian 5th house. So why not? That can be a creative expression through communications of all kinds, through you expressing your art. Saturn is in the 6th house, so that brings that into, it rules that 5th house through your everyday activities, what you do every day. And yeah, so Part of Fortune in the 5th is actually quite nice because it's a lucky house. The 5th is good fortune. So it's a nice place to have good fortune. Yeah. So I'm going to leave it there. I wish you every success.
Thank you, Susan.
And yeah, good luck with the year, and let's call it 2 years ahead, because you're going to reinvent yourself probably a few times over. So don't worry about settling on one thing straight away.
Can't wait. Can't wait.
Excellent.
Thank
Okay, Josh. Take care.
you.
Bye bye.